Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. We've got a really fun project today. At least I hope it's going to be fun. Could be a little bit complicated too. This is a zippered boxed pouch, but if you think you're seeing double, you are. We've got a double zippered boxed pouch. We've got an opening on each side. It is actually quite easy to make, except for the section where we box the corners. Aside from that, it's actually fairly easy. We've got an opening here in which you can put some goodies, and then we have another opening along the other side where you can also pop some goodies. Come along and I'll show you how to make this double boxed pouch. Okay, here are the things that we're going to need today. Now, it's my first time making this, so I'm not 100% sure about my lining measurements, but I will put the correct measurements up on the screen. Today, I'm just going to be using a regular dress zip. This is 30 centimetres or 12 inches. We need 2 of those. You can use your number 5 if you want to. It's completely up to you. For the outer fabric, I have 2 pieces that are 14 by 25 centimetres or 5.5 by 10 inches. I have 2 lining pieces that are 29 by 25 centimetres or 11.5 by 10 inches. Then we want some fusible fleece. I'm using a really lightweight fusible fleece. It can be known by many things around the world, so I really just use the thinnest fusible fleece that I can buy. The one that I'm using today is called Parlan, and I do have this on my website if anybody in Australia wants it. It's a fusible and it's really nice to use. I've already gone and fused that to the back of my outer fabric. We just need 2 pieces of a fusible fleece that is also 14 by 25 centimetres or 5.5 by 10 inches. If you want to put a tab on the end of your pouch, then you can just use a little bit of scrap fabric. I'm hoping that the excess tape that I have on my zip will be enough that I can make a little tab. Let's get started. First thing you want to do is take your fusible fleece and put that to the wrong side of your outer fabric. And once you've done that, grab one of these and grab your zip and one of your lining pieces. And we're going to attach the zip to one long end of the top of our pouch. I'm going to open this out for the moment. And this end here, where you've got the little metal tab, I'm going to place that face down over the fabric, and I'll line up that metal tab with the outer edge of my fabric, and you can pin or clip that zip in place. Now, if you're not confident with inserting zips, do this slowly. You can take this to the machine and sew all the way down that long edge. Put your zipper foot on, it'll make it easier to get close to the teeth. If you've got experience with zips, take your lining, place that over the top and put all those layers together. Sew the 3 layers together in one go, and then we can top stitch it after that. When I sew, I always sew with the fusible side faced up. It helps prevent the layers of fabric shifting whilst underneath the presser foot. As usual, I'll be using double-sided tape instead of pins and clips. So I'll place my zip with the zipper teeth faced down, that metal tab to my left edge, and line that up. Then I'll put my lining on top. Let's sew that in place, and then we'll open the layers out, bring the lining behind the outer fabric, and then we'll do a top stitch. And I forgot to turn my fabric around the other way. So what's happened here is it's gone and puckered a little bit because there wasn't enough stability in the lining fabric. So I'll press those fabric pieces away from each other, make them sit nice and flat, and then I'll bring the lining behind the outer. Now, you'll have noticed that we're not using tabs on these zips today. These are only a simple dress zip, so there's not much bulk in there, and we can actually sew over the edge. Now that that's done, we can take our other piece of outer fabric and we're going to sew that onto this side of the zip. It's easier if you just open out your fabric, fold your zip down, and then we can make a little mark right on the end of our zip where it meets the fabric. That way we can line up the other outer piece. Once again, we can open this zip out all the way, and I'm just going to flip the coil upside down and line up the marking that I've made and just make sure that's nice and even there, and you can even sit that over the top and make sure these side edges are nice and even. Of course, I like to use double-sided tape, so I've substituted the clips for that. If you're not confident with inserting zips, you can go and sew this in place right now. If you are confident and you want to do the lining and the zip all in one go, we'll close this up, bring the two outer pieces together, grab your lining, fold that down and up to the top edge of your zip, and then you can pin or clip that in place. I'm going to bring the raw edge up along the top and line that up. And this time I'll sew from the fleecy side. Then we can open it out, and we'll need to top stitch, but we'll need to open the zip all the way, which I'll show you at the machine. Okay, with that done, spread the outer fabric out, open up the zip all the way. You want to open it so that the fabric layers fan out away from each other. That'll make it easier to top stitch, and that's the reason why we actually have a much longer zip, is so that it's easier to top stitch. Finger press those layers of fabric, or you can iron them, and then it doesn't matter whether you start at the closed end or the open end of your fabric. We're going to top stitch. We'll have the lining to the back, and we'll top stitch those layers again. All right, we can close up our zip. We're not going to cut the ends off just yet. Turn this around. Line up the side seam just so that we can find the center of our lining fabric, and we can just take a nick out of the corner. At both ends. Open out your outer fabric, and we'll take this lining and line the center markings up with the center of your zip. Secure the edges, flip this around the other way again, and we want to open the end of the zip here, so we want to bring that to the middle of the bag somewhere, just so that it's out of the stitching area. We need to sew both ends of the zip closed now so that the slider doesn't go anywhere. We're also going to sew up the side edges of the lining. Take that to the machine, sew straight down here. Whilst we're at it, we'll be closing up the ends of the zip. Whenever I get to the end of a zip, I always triple stitch over that. I like to make sure that my threads aren't going to break at the end, so I do like to secure those stitches there. My seam allowance for this project is 1/4 inch. At the moment I'm doing less than that. All I want to do is secure the edge of the fabric and the zip in place, and then I'll worry about my seam allowance when I start doing the other side of the bag. Alright, this is what we have so far. We've got part of a pouch made, and this section here is completely enclosed. So it doesn't matter whether your zip's open or closed at this point, but you do want to make sure that the little pull is away from the side edges so that you don't accidentally stitch over it later. We can grab our other zip now, and we'll line it up the same way that we've lined up the other one. So I've got my slider opening from left to right, and you can see the end tabs are over here. I've got no fabric laying underneath because the lining is well out of the way. And once again, I'll open that zip and I'll line up the edge of the fabric with the metal tab just on the end of the zip there. And that's the wrong way. Nearly mucked that up. I want this bottom edge of my zipper tape to go on the top edge of my fabric. Flip that upside down because you want the straight edge of your tape to go along the straight edge of your fabric. I wonder how many people were yelling at me that the tape was all wrong. I heard you guys loud and clear. Now we'll take our other lining piece, place that over the top here, and we'll secure that in place as well. We'll take that to the machine and secure it together. Once again, we'll separate the lining and the outer fabric. Finger press those edges. Bring the lining to the back. So we have the new piece of lining to the back here. Now we're ready to top stitch these layers as well. Okay, this is what we have so far. If you weren't confident with zips when you started, you're going to be by the time you're finished. Now, at the beginning of the video, I wasn't too sure about the sizing because I haven't made this before. One of the things that determines the size of your linings is the fold over that you have on your zips, and also the different size zips that you might use. So that will affect the size of your lining. So the best thing to do here is to take your fabric and smooth that out, turn it back the other way, and you can see all that excess fabric that I have here on my lining. This is almost 2 centimeters longer, or 3/4 of an inch longer than my outer fabric. I want to make a false bottom in this bag. That means I still need to have a seam allowance. So what I'm going to do is make an allowance for my seam, which is 1/4 of an inch twice. So that's just over 1 centimeter, or it's 1/2 an inch. So I need to trim off this excess here, and you'll understand why we're doing that in a moment. I'm actually going to make mine just a fraction smaller because linings tend to be really baggy, and to help eliminate that, I'll take off a little bit of extra fabric. Okay. Bear with me for a moment whilst this piece of lining fabric is a little bit big. We're going to attach the other side of our zip to the other side of our outer fabric. And once again, if I close that zip and just fold that over my outer fabric, I can make a little mark here as a guide so I know where to line up the zip. With this top edge here, we'll bring the other end of our zip up to meet it. I've got that mark along here. I'll line that up and just check that the side edge of the fabric is lining up as well. Again, if you're still not used to putting zips in, go and sew that in place. We'll take the remaining piece of lining, bring that up as well, and line it all up. I'll go and sew all those layers together. Of course, I forgot to hit record. What I've done here is just sewn all the way down this edge here. I'm going to open up the zip so that I can turn this the right way around. Again, we want to separate the lining from the outer fabric just so that we can finger press that in place. But we have the rest of the bag all underneath it as well, and we've got this a little bit skewed. What we want to do here is take the zip. So you want to open out the outer fabric and your lining, so the lining is behind the top fabric, and this end of the zip, we'll just have that sitting behind our presser foot. It's a little bit fiddly, but much easier when you make sure you have a long zip. Okay, and then just carefully sew along the top edge here, making sure that there's nothing else behind it except for the lining that's supposed to be stitched. Okay, so we've done all the zipper work that we need to do. Let's turn this the right way around because we all want to see how this is going to look, don't we? Close that up. On this side, once it's flattened out, we have our pouch, and flip it over and we have another pouch. This is the one that's got the pocket that's fully enclosed, and this one here we've just finished. You can see inside the lining is a little bit baggy. Let's turn this inside out so that we have our big baggy piece of lining shown. We'll line up the edge of the zip just like we did before, and all I want to do here is mark a crease in the bottom of the lining there, and we'll do the same on this side. just press a crease along the bottom here. Now we're going to make a false seam. So normally you would have two separate pieces of fabric and you'd sew them together at the bottom. This is just a nice cheats way of doing it. We'll sew from the outside up to about here, and then from here to the outside, and we're going to leave that unstitched. This will be where we turn our bag through. I'll quickly go and do that now, and then I'll show you what we're going to do here. Okay, so I've left an opening here, but there's no opening. What I like to do when I create these false bottoms is I finished my stitching just here and here. I'm going to take my seam ripper and come in at the folded edge about 2 centimeters or an inch or so away from where I've finished sewing. So I've just put the point of my seam ripper in there, and I'm just going to tear along the edge of my fabric until I've gone about the same distance at the other end. What that's done now is given me an opening to turn my bag through later. I can finger press this in line with the stitching line, and this will help me close up my opening after, and we can leave that for now. Okay, we've made our little opening. That's just going to be sitting at the very top there. I've lined this false seam up with the center of my zip along here. At this point you want to make sure that this zip is open at least part of the way. So I've opened it out about half. You can see it's sitting right here, and all of these layers are lined up together. I want to create a little bit of depth to this pouch, so I'm going to do some box corners. Remember, our seam allowance is 1/4 inch or about 6 millimeters, and all I've done is drawn in that seam allowance on both sides. When you're boxing your corners, it's really important to make sure you do your corners the same size. I'm going to make mine a 1/2 inch corner, which is just over 1 centimetre. You can make it 1 centimetre if you want to. From the stitching line here, I've marked 1/2 inch. From the fold line, I'll do the same. And that's just a small boxed corner here. Now that 1/2 inch is actually going to be doubled because it'll be over both sides of the fabric. We'll mark that on each of the 4 corners, remembering to take our 1/2 inch from the stitching line. Now that zip is open along here. Just lay that down so it sits nice and flat. I'll pop a couple of clips in place just to keep everything even whilst I cut out my boxes. And you may notice that the lining at the back, this is the one that we secured to the first part of the pouch. You may notice that lining at the back is a little bit longer. Remember, that's because I didn't know what size I was cutting my fabric to begin with. I have provided the correct measurements to you in the list at the front, and all it is that 1/4 inch twice. I've actually just folded that over so that can be hidden, but that shouldn't happen on yours. Okay, let's cut out the box corners. All right, the box corners have been cut out. We've got our little opening at the top here. We've got our zip open at least part of the way. I've trimmed the zip at this end, clipped that together, and at this end I've trimmed away both of the excess pieces of zipper tape. I've separated one side from the other and removed that little metal tab at the end there for one of these pieces. I'll fold that in half, and the folded edge is going to go in on top of this section that we've sewn earlier. Just sit that inside there. This open section of the zip will sit directly over the top. we'll line up all of those layers so the centre of the zip lines up and the centre of the seam lines up. Before we can box our corners, we need to sew up the side seam. So what we've got here is a lining, the outer, and then we've got another lining. We'll take these two lining pieces and just keep those out of the way for the time being, and we'll repeat that for the other side. And what you will do is just fold those lining pieces away for the moment, and we've got the outer bag section, line up the box corners, and we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance from the top of the box corner as close as you can get to the edge of the zipper tape. You'll do a back stitch at the beginning and the end. You'll do it for that side and that side, and then move your lining out of the way from underneath as well, and you'll repeat along here and along here. I've already attempted this once and made a mistake, so you have the benefit of not making my mistake. So with our outer fabric to begin with, we're going to sew from the outside edge in on both pieces, making sure that the lining isn't in the way. Then when you've done that, you can unclip your linings, but not this one. Move the outer fabric and the lining out of the way, and you'll sew the side seam up on your lining here and along this side. Once that lining's done and you've done this outer piece, then you can unclip this lining, place that to the bottom, and you can sew the side seam on that one as well. The reason we need to sew all of these three pieces individually is because it's the best way to be able to have a fully lined product without having any bindings in place. Most of you know that I like to avoid bindings whenever I can, so I'll try and figure out another way to do linings. So by sewing these side seams up individually, you're closing it up and allowing yourself to have a fully enclosed lined bag. What will happen after you've sewn those three sides together is you'll still have an opening on the end there where the zip is, because we're not going all the way across just yet. Once you've done all those three pieces, then you can remove your clip, and where you've stopped sewing, you'll start here and you'll finish here, and you'll sew over all of those layers of your zipper tape. And on this end, you'll also sew over your end tab that you might have in place. So for all of these layers now, I'll take this to the machine, sew them individually. Once they're all individually done, I'll do the center part. Line up your 1/4 inch seam line, back stitch at the beginning. I've only got the outer fabric at the moment. And I'll sew as far as I can. Back stitch. And remember to move that lining back and that lining back at the top. And then I've got my outer fabric lined up at the bottom here. And I'm sewing as close as my presser foot will allow me to at this section here. If it's more comfortable for you, you can actually flip around and sew from this side. It'll allow you to get a little bit further. Like that. I'll repeat for the other side. Remembering to move my linings out of the way each time. Now that my outer fabric is done, I can grab one of my linings, have the other two layers out of the way, and do exactly the same thing. I've done my outer fabric, one lining, now we've just got the other side to go. All right, all layers have been sewn separately. We've got that one done. The middle one, which is the outer fabric, and then this one here as well. So all of those have been done along the side seam, but we need to close up this center section here. I'm going to start sewing around about here where I've stopped or started sewing, backstitch. Then I'm going to sew over all the layers of all of the zips and the end tab if there is one, and we'll continue to sew until just past where you've started or ended here. I'll backstitch over the center section a couple of times. So I've got everything secure, but I have the layers separated just on the edge. That way I can do my boxed corners. Flip around to the other side and we'll do exactly the same thing. Okay, we've got three lots of box corners to do. Let's do the outer fabric first because that's easier to work with. I'll mark a line here. This is just so that you can see the edge of the fabric or the fold. We want this side seam here to line up with that fold that we had. And I'm not going to lie to you, this is a little bit fiddly. Okay, that's one done. Only 11 to go. So I'm doing all four sides of the outer fabric piece first. Okay, so with the outside fabric we've clipped the corner here and around on this side as well. So we've done all four corners there. Now we have to do the lining for one side of the bag and the lining for the other side of the bag. If it's more comfortable for you, you can go and take this to the machine and sew that up first. I think I might actually do that now, just so as not to have too many clips in the way. Let's go do that. I'm still using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, the outer fabric corners are done. And all we need to do now is the lining. We'll do exactly the same for these corners. Some of you may have already put this in the too hard basket. It's actually not hard, it's just fiddly, and it's really only one extra piece of fabric that you've got to box the corners for. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same as it is for most of our other boxed bags. All right, let's go and finish this up. So I've got 4 corners to sew on each side. Once that's done, we can actually turn this the right way around. Looking forward to seeing how it all comes together. And this is the last one. Okay, let's have a look and see how this has turned out. I'll open the zip up the rest of the way and then we can bring everything through. And before you close up your lining, you just want to get in with both fingers and poke out those corners. And then when you're happy with all of that, fold the edges in on your lining and I'll sew that section closed. I'll quickly go and do that now. All right, that side has been closed up. I'll just tuck in those corners. The lining's still a little bit baggy. And there we have a little boxed pouch twice. Something a little bit different. So it's only very small. It's not going to hold much, but it'll be perfect for perhaps your cosmetic brushes on one side and your makeup on the other. And there's the excess zipper tab on the end there. You could easily have put one on the other side as well. I didn't even think of it until just now. So the lining is a little bit puffy, I think. Let's find something to put in here. I think this does need a tab on each end, so in hindsight I should have actually put the other end on as well, and then I can open it up and close it with the use of the tab. So if you decide to make this, put a tab on each end, it will be easier. There's plenty of room for some pens and markers on this side, and same again on this side. So it's quite spacious inside. What are you going to use this for? All right, how did you cope with that? I have to confess, I did find the corners quite fiddly to do. I wanted a small box corner, that's fine. The width of the fabric didn't really allow me enough room to easily manipulate all the fabric that I wanted to. If you're a little bit hesitant about making this, but you really want to, rather than cutting the fabric at 5.5 inches, perhaps make it a little bit bigger so that you have a wider pouch. That's going to give you a whole lot more room on the side seams to work with the box corners. It will also enable you to make it a little bit deeper as well if you wanted to. It is an easy project to make. It's just that the box corners are a little bit fiddly. I'm not sure if I'm going to make this for the shop. I'd like to. I might actually see how this one goes. I think I'll put a $25 price tag on it and see what happens. It's a fun little idea, and I love the fabric as well, so I do really like nice vibrant colours. I think this one would be a really good pattern to use for those sample swatch fabrics that we get. We get lots of long narrow strips. They'd be perfect in individual colours with different zips on them, and then a nice lightweight lining. I'm not really happy about the lining on the inside. It's still a little bit baggy. I did try to make it a little bit smaller, but I just think that because there are so many folds on the inside, it's just the way it's got to be. I didn't want to have any bindings on the inside. I wanted to have this fully lined for both sides, for which I'm happy about. But yes, it is still a little bit baggy. It may be better if I use a stabilizer on the lining fabric as well. Not sure about that. Tell me what your experiences are with baggy linings and putting extra stabilizer on. I know some people like to do larger seam allowances, and others cut their fabric a little bit smaller. Let me know what you do. And as I mentioned earlier, I would also put a tab on the other end. I think it'll help because there's two zips sewn in together at the end. I do think it needs to have a tab at both ends. Otherwise, actually, I did just remember that I have these little zipper pull things that I can attach to the zip. So I can attach that to that side, one to the other, and that'll make it just as easy. So I can eliminate the use for tabs. Well, there's a thought. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.